Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have with us Scott Klusendorf, joining us from Georgia, the great state of Georgia, always on my mind. And I'm in frozen California. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Lucas. How are those $9 a gallon gas prices?
You know, I don't know what else to expect up here. You know, I tried to tell people what would happen, and they just look at you like you're paranoid. And then when it happens, they look at you like you're some kind of weird prophet. But it's too late. So that's my life. That's my entire life. How are prices? How are gas prices there in the great state of Georgia?
Well, they're going to go up like they are everywhere, but at the moment it's $4.20 a gallon.
I'm jealous. That's lower than it was here before.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, I guess we can just blame it on January 6th. That caused everything, all the problems.
Everything. January 6th. It's Trump's fault.
Yeah. Is that your office that in the background?
Yeah, you know, I got to make myself look smart because, you know, living in a red state, you can't be smart, right? You got to live in a blue one.
Yeah. Well, earlier, before we started recording, we were talking about cigars, and I don't think I've ever had a cigar with you yet. I don't know if that's something you
We're going
talk
to
about
fix that
publicly, but okay. I guess I should have asked if that was a public thing before I started, but
no, it's fine. We're going to fix that. We've never had one. We are definitely going to do one. And I was tempted to light up before we did this podcast.
You know, I that sounds great. I've had a cigar in the morning one time in my life, and I was on vacation, and it wasn't a bad experience, but some people can do it, and it doesn't ever occur to me. So are you a morning cigar guy? Does that work for you with coffee or tea or something?
I am a anytime cigar guy.
Okay.
I don't smoke a ton of them. I smoke maybe 4 to 6 a month. But I'll tell you what, you should be
46 a month. Did you say 46?
4 to 6, not 46.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the 46 a month would be people like Brett Kunkle, you know.
Yeah, that's funny. So 4 to 6 a month, that's not too bad. That's about like once or twice a week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis Prager has
in the winter.
Yeah, okay. Why less in the winter? You don't like the cold?
Yeah, I'm a wuss. I've got too much California blood in me. I lived 44 years in California, so you know, coming out here to the east where it's chilly in the winter, I'm just a wuss.
Where did you grow up?
Southern Cal, Granada Hills.
Oh yeah, I know exactly
where that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Valley guy. Did the whole LA thing. Went to UCLA for undergrad, and then baptized it by going to Biola for grad school. So I did all the Southern Cal.
Yeah. You made the rounds. You did the secular rounds and you did the Christian rounds. And back when you grew up, the Valley was different. The Valley was much different politically.
It was Ronald Reagan's territory. You could count on the Valley going Republican as easy as the sun coming up in the morning.
Yeah.
But of course that all changed in the early 90s. 92 was the first time the state really flipped blue, and it hasn't looked back since, regrettably. But growing up, it was a wonderful place to be, the Valley. You know, going to Dodger Stadium was one of the most wholesome experiences around. You could go watch a game, listen to Vince Scully. It was great. You go there now and you're going to see fights breaking out in the stands. You're going to see people yelling obscenities in front of small children. It's really changed.
Wow, that's sad. That is so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're on the 118, I mean, I've spent a lot of time going right through where you grew up. teaching up there. My first teaching assignment, my first non-Biola teaching assignment. I think my microphone is acting up. Hold on. My first non-Biola teaching assignment was at Moore Park College. And so I had to take the Ronald Reagan Freeway, that 118, and it's called the Ronald Reagan Freeway, into Ventura County, right through the valley. And when I taught at Cal State Northridge, take the Reseda exit, which is on the way, and pop down to Chatsworth and just get in there, teach some classes, and then maybe pop over to Moore Park College if I had to, or over to Pepperdine or wherever I was. Pierce College as well as in the valley. I taught there for a while.
Yep.
Several years. So.
Yeah, I went to Pierce right out of high school.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because my high school GPA, Lucas, was 1.9. It was really bad. I did not have an awakening in terms of study until junior college.
Wow. Wow.
And then I did really well, and my grades were good enough to get into UCLA, and I transferred in.
Where did you go to high school?
San Fernando Valley Academy. It's in Northridge on Lassen and Zelza, right near Cal State Northridge there, a Seventh-day Adventist K through 12 school.
Okay. And so you went to Pierce College. How long were you at Pierce College?
Oh, I dabbled on and off. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, but I roughly spent 3.5, 4 years there. Tried going a business route, then decided I was going to go auto technology, which actually was really good. Saved me a lot of money fixing my own car, which I've still benefited from that knowledge even today. And then thought, maybe I'll try theater. That was a one semester mistake that quickly got rectified. And then eventually decided I was going to go English, which was a great move, and got over to UCLA while the English department there was still conservative, believe it or not, in the 80s. And then from there, after graduating UCLA, a decade later, went to Biola.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. I had some of my best teaching, my best memories teaching were at Pierce College. Some of the funnest classes that I had to teach were at Pierce College in the Valley, in the Democrat Valley, with these kids that have never seen a Republican professor. It was like I was Van Halen. I'm serious. They were like, well, this guy is crazy. And that was, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The higher ups
I
didn't
had
like
great
me,
professors at Pierce, believe it or not. In fact, my logic professor, my first philosophy course I took, which was called An Introduction to Arguments, was taught by a guy named Rosecrans. And here's what he did. He brought in his gargantuan sound system from home. I mean, speakers, boxes that were 4 feet tall. And he set them up in the classroom. I think it took him an hour before every class to do this. And we would listen at deafening volume to classic rock tunes, and we would analyze the lyrics according to what we were learning about fallacies, and we would diagram the lyrics with our if P then Q formulas. Had a blast learning it. And to this day, it was probably the greatest course I ever took.
Literally a blast.
A blast. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you really haven't lived until you analyze AC/DC and Van Halen for logical structure.
You know, you're bringing me back to when I first moved to California from Colorado, which was 1993. And we had a Republican governor at the time, which was Pete Wilson.
Pete Wilson.
Los Angeles, as you probably remember, ditched their 20-year Democrat mayor, first black mayor,
They got
for
Reardon.
for a Republican mayor. Los Angeles had a Republican mayor, so those days are gone now. But it's interesting to hear firsthand what it was like. So, okay, UCLA. Take me to UCLA. You mentioned you majored in English. I notice your English is very good. Um, I can understand you, and I'm a native speaker. And you said that it was a conservative department. Tell me what you mean by that. Tell us what you
Well,
mean.
for example, my Chaucer professor, V.A. Colvey, was mentored by Tolkien and Lewis at Oxford. He used to walk in and meet with those guys at Magdalen College at Oxford. He knew the Inklings, and he taught Chaucer the way it should be taught. It was wonderful. I had only two hard left professors the whole time I was at UCLA. I
Praise
took a
God.
feminist lit class just for the heck of it. I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. But
Yeah.
other than that, it was conservative.
And by conservative, you mean that they, not that they voted for Ronald Reagan necessarily, but
No,
that they had, what do you mean by that? You mean that
they were
they,
classical Truman liberals who believed that free speech mattered, who did not want to censor ideas they disagreed with, who did not read into the text their own subjective meaning, but sought to gain from the text the meaning intrinsic to it.
hmm,
So uh, at that point, you were just beginning to get the rumblings of what became known as the intentional fallacy, that we should never go to a text and ask, what did the author intend by this? We should only project our own meaning on it, which of course we all know is self-refuting, because is it true that we should never intend the meaning of a text, or is that just our projected meaning? But that aside, the faculty I had really thought there was something objective to learn from Chaucer, from Shakespeare, from Milton, from Skelton, from Sidney, Spencer, all of it. And so they taught literature that way. And you learn to write. The best thing I got out of UCLA is writing. Which, by the way you approach a critical essay, Lucas, is exactly the way you should prepare structure for a speech. I remember they had these courses at UCLA called the 10 series. I called them the Darwin courses. They were designed to weed out people who were not fit to be English majors.
hmm,
They were very hard courses, and they were right up front. You took them right away.
hmm.
I showed up for 10A, the first of those courses, and I wrote a paper, and I thought, oh, that's a pretty good paper. I got it back. It was a D plus. And I thought, how can this be? I've been getting, A's and B's on my paper. And the course TA sat me down, and she looked me in the eye and said, do you want to pass this course, or do you want to fail like all the other dweebs that don't know how to write? I said, I want to pass. She said, okay, two things. Number one, you're going to be in my office every week for the next 3 weeks, twice a week, Thursdays at 9, Tuesdays at 10. And secondly, I'm going to give you the 3 words that will help you succeed as an English major. And may God have mercy on you, on your soul, if you forget these 3 words. Here they are: thesis, thesis, thesis. Your essays need to pop right out of the gate arguing something. Don't beat around the bush with boring plot summary. Go in the front door, tell me what you're going to argue, and then meticulously defend it throughout your piece. And if you're not going to do that, you're not fit to be an English major. Whoa. That has become my motto for speaking. What is it I do when I speak? Thesis, thesis, thesis. If I don't have a single sentence laying out what I'm going to argue in a speech, I shouldn't even show up, because I don't know what I'm talking about. I approach the same way with pro-life advocacy. What are the 3 most important words in pro-life advocacy? Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. If you don't stick to a clear formal argument, you're going to get destroyed. So UCLA actually, ironically, did a great thing investing in a pro-life apologist who I'm sure they're horrified by now, but at the time it was great training for me. Oh, by the way, I'm not the only one who came out of UCLA. Ben Shapiro, Lila Rose, there's been a few of us that have come from there.
That's right. I think Ben Shapiro went through there when he was like 5 or something, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And
He cites me in one of his books, and I think what happened is he heard me when I spoke on campus at UCLA one time, way back. I mean, goodness, this had to be late 90s, maybe. I don't know,
oh
something
yeah,
like
he was
that.
7 back then.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. So no regrets with UCLA then. You had a great experience.
Absolutely none. But there's no way I'd send my kid there today.
How has the English department changed? Have you kept up with it?
I went over there. It's interesting. Our daughter, who's an English major, like her dad, she's at Grove City College, though, not UCLA. We took a daddy-daughter trip to UCLA just to, relive good times. And we went and visited the English department, and it was thoroughly postmodern, thoroughly woke. I mean, it was pretty evident it had changed dramatically from the days that I was there.
Yeah, I think it's probably that sounds about right. I mean, you would know a lot better than I would, but what's happening in English departments, I think, is something like it's the only language that you could study where the faculty are embarrassed about where the language is from.
That is so well put. That is so well put. Yeah, you're exactly right. And what's happened is you look at the English departments and people are afraid to publish. And here's why. And you know this. They've bought into an epistemology called standpoint epistemology. Standpoint epistemology says we don't know things by examining them objectively according to the dictates of sound reason. We know things based on our standpoint. Are we an oppressor or are we an oppressed person? If you're a white heterosexual male, you are by definition an oppressor. And therefore, you have no standpoint in the marketplace of ideas to convey truth because you're cut off from it. You are part of the problem. So I think what's happened in English, all of the humanities, for example, is that scholars who were trained to know better have bought into this notion that they basically have to apologize for claiming to be right on anything. And this leads to what Bloom talked about, the closing of the American mind. We become so open-minded and so afraid to take a position on anything, we actually end up becoming extremely closed-minded.
Yes. Yeah, that's wonderfully said. I would add that the racism of the Democratic Party, and I say a lot of people when they are embarrassed about a party, they'll specify the time period. So they'll say that was the old Democratic Party. Well, I mean, but
Right.
it's like it's existed for a certain amount of time. You can ask when it was founded. It's the same party. The party, just like I can say when America was founded, it's the same country. It's the racism that animated so much of the Democratic Party for so many decades has been maintained, I think. Now, the only difference is that you wouldn't be able to see that unless you knew what the definition of racism always was. The definition of racism is exactly how you said it, where the race of the person is the person's point of view is discounted based on their race.
Mm-hmm.
See, and the only difference is the race changed. That's all. But it's still racism. It's still the same thing.
Oh, so, yeah. I mean, look, when you tell white students on a university campus that they are intrinsically racist, And even if they are the kindest person in the world to their black neighbors, even if they gave their entire fortunes to a black family, they would still be intrinsically racist because whiteness can never be purged from your system. You are an oppressor by category, and there's no way you can change category. The only thing you can do is become woke to your intrinsic racism and practice self-negation and anti-racism, which is anything but anti-racist. It's exactly as you say. It's just racism with a new label.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. And so that's the importance of definitions, I would say.
Yes. And that's the
When
world we're
people,
in right now, Lucas. You're
yeah.
exactly right. A lot of conservatives think they can just launch into their defense of what they believe without defining terms. Terms have been switched, and it's gross intellectual dishonesty, but it's being done. And if we're not defining what we mean, we're going to be in a boatload of trouble.
So Scott, what you do for a living is that you are a trainer, is that, and tell me if I'm accurately saying this, you train people how to defend the pro-life view. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now,
We
how long have you
in
been doing that?
principally,
Okay.
yeah, we've been doing that since 1990, actually, late 1990. I had always been pro-life, but when I was an associate pastor at a church in Southern California in fall of 1990, I would have been one of those guys, Lucas, that paid lip service to the pro-life movement, but didn't do much about it. And so, for example, I would go to the local pregnancy center banquet, donate an obligatory $150 for the year, and go home thinking, all right, I've done my duty. That changed in November of 1990. The local pregnancy center director invited me to come hear a speaker, a former member of the Reagan Justice Department, who was a U.S. attorney working in Los Angeles. And this guy, by the name of Greg Cunningham, gave a pro life speech that was very impressive to me. Not only did he lay out very good logic, but he did something that fundamentally changed my life forever. He showed an 8-minute video depicting abortion. I had never seen abortion. And I watched that, Lucas, and my moral intuitions came screaming to the surface. And I realized that I was really no different than the priest and the Levite in the parable of the Good Samaritan. I said that I opposed injustice, but I wasn't acting like I opposed injustice. I was opposed to abortion at the feeling level, but not opposed to it at the behavioral level. And
Oh,
that
wow. Yeah,
day,
yeah.
that all changed. And
Mm.
so, bottom line is, 6 months later, with the blessing of the church I was at, I resigned my associate pastor's role and began looking into how could I train pro-lifers to make a case for what they believe.
Wow, that's very compelling. So this was an acting U.S. attorney. I mean, U.S. attorney that was then currently in office.
Yeah, he was assigned to Southern Cal. He shortly resigned afterward to start his own pro-life organization, but that's where he was at the time. Yeah.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Um, I don't hear of U.S. attorneys doing that very often. You don't think of a prosecutor uh showing up to do a pro-life talk like that.
No, you don't, especially under the current administration.
Scott, so when in 1990, had you already graduated from UCLA? What were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and how long after UCLA did you find yourself at Biola? How long after that?
That was a decade. I took a decade off, and that was good because it established my pro-life platform during that time. And went to grad school when I began to notice that the abortion debate really required understanding a lot of the larger worldview currents that were in motion. It it really required you having some working knowledge of the worldviews that people bring to the abortion debate, the assumptions that they bring to the table. And so I thought, you know what, a degree, a master's degree in Christian apologetics would help with that, and it most certainly did.
Awesome. That's awesome. Um, Now, tell us about your philosophy of how you approach pro-life activism. What's the key issue? How did you come up with the learning that lesson?
Well, I see approaching pro-life apologetics, that's the term I'll use to describe this.
Okay.
Uh, I
Pro-life.
think pro-life apologists need to do three things. And typically they skip step one, which gets them in trouble, and they jump right to steps 2 and 3. But here's step one. You have got to set ground rules for the debate. In today's world, people love to substitute argument with something else. They don't want to do the hard work of actually refuting arguments. They want to dismiss them with labels and cliches. And if you are not prepared for that, you're going to end up chasing rabbit trails. So we want to set the ground rules, and I'll come back to explain that in more detail in just a minute. Secondly, we need to make our case persuasively. And in the kind of world we're in right now, Lucas, that means doing it in ways that secularists cannot dismiss on the face of it. So we're going to argue our case from science and philosophy. Not that we are hiding our metaphysical foundations, we're not, but we want to at least get in the door by making sure they understand we have public reasons for what we believe. And then thirdly, we need to handle objections persuasively. So that first thing, setting the ground rules. I tell pro-life apologists all the time exactly what I told you a moment ago. Your success as a pro-life apologist comes down to 3 words, and you can write them down if you want. Here they are: syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. If you don't start with a clearly defined syllogism, people will change the subject on you. I mean, I don't know how it is with you, Lucas, but I know how it is with me. If I'm in an argument with my wife and she's winning, every rational mind in the universe knows she's winning, the Lord knows she's winning, I'll probably try to change the topic. I think that's human nature. And people do this with abortion all the time. So how do we keep the main thing the main thing? We stick to our pro-life syllogism. Here it is. Premise 1, it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore abortion is wrong. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. Now, you and I both know there are really only 3 ways to defeat that syllogism. You could show that the argument is invalid. In other words, the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises. Or you could show the argument is unsound. One or more of the premises are untrue. Or you could show that we've got equivocation. The terms are used in a way that aren't clear. Outside of that, the argument stands. What's interesting is almost nobody attacks those 3 areas. They only change the subject and want to talk about choice, privacy, why you hate women, why you want to force your morality, why you're bringing religion into this debate. And they do nothing to address your argument. By sticking to that syllogism, you can practice what I call narrating the debate. Every time they try to change the topic, you say, time out, can I make an observation? I laid out a specific argument for my position. I noticed that you did not show that my argument was unsound. You did not show that my argument was invalid. You did not show that I used terms in an unclear fashion. All you did is attack me personally. I'm open-minded. If my argument is bad, I want to know that, but I need you to show me that it's bad, not just call me names. It allows you to narrate what's going on at the process level and enforce ground rules for a fruitful discussion. Then we need to argue our case persuasively. That's step 2. Look, we don't just assert that abortion is wrong. We make an argument. We argue from science that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. They're not part of another human being like skin cells on the back of my hand are. Rather, they are distinct, whole members of the human family from the very beginning, from the one cell stage.
So you're on
Then we argue,
premise, you're on premise
go
2
ahead.
now, right?
Yes,
You're
correct.
on premise 2.
And
Okay,
then we
let's state
argue,
that. Let's state that again. So a syllogism for everybody out there. If you haven't heard that term, or maybe you have and you don't know what it is,
yep,
a syllogism is a deductive argument with two premises, right? Is that how you define it?
yes,
Okay. So he's using a deductive argument, and that means that the form of it is what makes it a good argument. And by good, the technical word is valid.
valid.
That's one level of good.
Conclusion follows.
Yeah. That's the formal, that's what means it's formally good. It's valid. And then if it's good in a larger sense, it's not just valid, it's sound. And that's a technical word. I know the word sound doesn't sound like a technical word, but it is. It means
Yes,
that it's valid and the premises are true.
correct.
And so if you're driving and listening to this or whatever, obviously you can't take notes, but you can always go back and rehear that argument. So let's say that argument again. Premise 1 is
It's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being.
it's wrong to
Premise
intentionally kill.
two,
Okay.
yep. And then premise two is the minor premise. Abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings or kills an innocent human being.
Okay.
The conclusion is therefore abortion is wrong. And
Yeah.
if the premises are true, the conclusion follows.
Yes. Very good. That's great. So that's really tight. And when you say syllogism, you're saying you gotta do it that way because it's just human nature for people to change the subject, call you a racist, call you a fascist, whatever, call you names, right? Anti-woman. Of
A
course,
Madonna fan. I mean, who
yeah.
knows? Yeah.
Of course, that one doesn't work as well anymore since men can be pregnant now. Who would have
Yeah,
thought?
really.
What a great invention. And then okay,
Yeah.
so you go premise 1 is it's wrong to intentionally kill a human being. Premise 2 is abortion,
An innocent human being.
an innocent human being. It's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, leaving room for the death penalty, right? Leaving room for war.
Mhm.
Premise 2 is abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. And
Mhm.
you argue that you were on science. That's where I paused you. You were on science. And so you were
Yes.
saying that from science we know premise 2 is right. And tell us again about the science again. How
Well,
does it?
let me back up just a little bit.
Okay.
We're not using science to prove that abortion is wrong. We're using science to prove what kind of thing is the unborn. Because remember, our syllogism says it's wrong to intentionally kill a human being. So we're going to find out if the unborn are human beings by using science. And that science of embryology is clear that from the earliest stages of development, the unborn are in fact distinct, living, whole human beings. They're not part of another human being. They are themselves distinct human entities. So we're not using religion to get that. We're not even using philosophy to get that. We're using an empirical investigation based on the science of embryology.
Yeah, that's great. And a lot of people will say for shorthand, the unborn. And so that's very helpful to use science to clarify what you mean by that. And so
Yes,
sometimes what I do is I just say the unborn what? Because
yes,
there's, for example, flies. Well, I don't know if it makes sense to say an egg hatching is unborn. I guess it does. Maybe an unborn chicken or an unborn. I think we understand what that is. It's a chicken that hasn't hatched yet, but it's a fertilized
Right.
egg. Same with anything that has eggs, whether it's crocodiles or whether it's flies or whatever. Um, an unborn fly is a fly. That's what it is. That's why you have to say
Yes.
unborn and the noun after unborn. Um, but that doesn't always work for people because of the way we're made. I guess we have these defense mechanisms, and it's an emotional issue, and the emotions oftentimes cloud our ability to see things well. So this is really helpful, the way you've designed it to where you're guarding against any of these natural tendencies for people to just ignore the argument, right? Ignore
Yes.
the truth. How long did it take you to
Yeah.
figure this out? How when did it when did you discover that you have to, was it right away? I mean, was it, you saw that abortion video from the US attorney, and then you went and had a hamburger or a sandwich, and then you were like, we need a syllogism, or was it, how long did it take you to figure that out?
Uh, I'll tell you in the simple form you just heard it, 20 years. I was, I think that in the last decade in particular, Lucas, clarification has become a key objective in pro-life apologetics. We have got to clarify everything. And I thought we need a very clear, simple way to state what we're arguing that puts us in the strongest position for keeping the main thing the main thing. Um, and that's why I went with it the way that I did. Now, I was assuming that syllogism in various forms. I had used other syllogisms that were a bit more wordy and I think too cumbersome. This one, I think, just cuts all the fat out of it and gets right to the central issue, which I think is crucial for pro life apologists to do.
20 years sounds like quite a learning curve. And I can
Well,
imagine the kind of experiences that you were having.
yep.
And I have to imagine it because you haven't articulated any specific experiences, but I can imagine the kind of experiences you must have been having to go, oh, I got to tighten that up a bit, or oh yeah, that doesn't sound, that's not good. I'm losing the audience here. So do you have an
Yeah.
anecdote you want to share with us?
Well, I've had numerous debates. I've probably done 30 to 35 debates publicly on abortion. My opponents have been Nadine Strawson, former president of the ACLU, Edward Tabash, the director for the Council for Secular Humanism there in California, uh, Catherine Colbert, who argued in front of the Supreme Court in the Thornburg decision in 1986, Catherine Neer, the president of Planned Parenthood in California. And what these debates taught me, not necessarily through my opponents, but through the question and answer time that happens in these debates, questions from the audience, I learned something. I was winning the formal debate hands down in most cases, meaning the actual interaction with my opponent where we're each putting out our case, I was winning. But it would go to the Q&A and up comes an
Yeah.
emotional person who is shaking with tears coming down her cheeks, and she's pointing at me saying, how dare you call me a murderer? Things like this. Or someone who would say, why do you hate women so badly? Why do you despise them? And at that point, you're not being asked to be an apologist. You really have to become a psychologist. You have to navigate a very tricky cognitive situation where it's not arguments that are being advanced, it's raw emotionalism. So in order to keep the main thing, I needed something I could always come back to where I could show empathy for the questioner, but still come back to what really matters in this debate. So now, if I get that person who's shaking and trembling and pointing their finger at me, I will say something very similar to this. I'll say, I'm very sorry that you're hurting right now. And it doesn't please me that you are. I do want to review what I've argued here today. I didn't argue that I hated women. I didn't argue that I was here to call you a murderer. I argued one thing. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. I can make that argument without attributing to you personally any kind of intent or motive. I don't know your situation. I don't know why you did what you did. But my argument stands or falls apart from how people feel about it. And I can narrate the debate that way.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Do you think that it's a handicap to be a man and be in that situation?
Well, if you're going to ask me to kind of pull out the sarcastic side of me, I'm almost tempted these days, Lucas, when people say to me, "You're a man. You can't speak on this issue." I want to say, how do you know that I'm a man? I mean, in the
Yeah,
age of Caitlyn Jenner, that's a risky
sure.
assumption, right?
They have no idea what
But
they're
that's
doing. Yeah.
probably, yeah, yeah. But here again, this is where narrating the debate is so crucial. Let's go back to my syllogism. That syllogism stands or falls apart from the gender of those advancing it. Pro-life women use the exact syllogism as pro-life men. Oh, by the way, if no man can speak on abortion, we got to reverse Roe v. Wade. It was decided by 9 men. Arguments are advanced on their merits. They are evaluated on their merits. They stand or fall apart from people making them. To use another example, you and I both know this. Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Look, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Paul is right. We're dead in our sins. We have no hope, and we're the world's biggest joke. But if he did rise from the dead, that changes everything. It all hinges on that. But isn't it interesting that leading atheists like the late Christopher Hitchens, who wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, he wrote this book and it's a masterful survey of how religion has screwed things up. You got to hand it to him on that. He did his homework. However, could Christianity still be true even if Christians are rascals? And the answer is yes, because it stands or falls on the resurrection. And just like with abortion, in our defense of the Christian faith, it helps if we can simplify things and keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with human nature being what it is. So,
Yeah.
okay, so that's a pretty effective response to. I'm just trying. I'm gonna let people see your how you handle objections. So I threw out the man objection. That's fairly low hanging fruit. Um, Now, what about the what about the objection to premise one? Now, this is a little bit more of a nerdy kind of objection, but premise one says it's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Would that mean that that it's wrong to go to war and and if that means that civilians are going to get killed?
Oh, I'm happy to get nerdy with you here. Yeah, let's go back to our syllogism. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And here is where we need to make a very helpful distinction between intending evil and foreseeing it.
Okay.
A general in a just war can foresee the deaths of innocent human beings, but he does not intend them the way that Hitler did during the London Blitz when he bombed central London and intended to kill children. A general can foresee the evil but does not intend it. With abortion, we not only foresee evil, we intend it. So war and abortion are not morally parallel. And that can be seen very simply by how we defined abortion. It's the intentional killing of an innocent human being, where war tactics may not be that. Another nerdy distinction, if you want to go that way, is between contingent evils and intrinsic ones. Murder, rape are intrinsic evils, and they should be opposed always, and they're wrong on the face of it. Where something like war or capital punishment may be wrong, but it depends on the context, the circumstances. We refer to those as contingent evils. Abortion is not in the category of a contingent evil, it's in the category of an absolute or intrinsic evil. This is why when Democrat politicians try to claim pro-life credentials by saying, oh, we're pro-life on war, oh, we're pro-life on poverty, we're pro-life on capital punishment, we're just wrong on one life issue, you're wrong on 10 of them. We need to point out that they're engaging in a category error here. Abortion is not a contingent evil like the things they are referencing. It's an intrinsic evil. It's wrong on the face of it. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. So, what Democrats are asking us to do is overlook an intrinsic evil, the intentional killing of an innocent human being, in order to basically bless contingent ones. And this just cannot be.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm gonna press you a little bit further then on that. Since you handled that so well, and obviously you thought so deeply about it. So for those people that are very curious out there, maybe they're not up on this debate, but maybe they might be wondering something like, um, well, if someone had read Eileen McDonough, for example, and she argues that it's self-defense. Abortion is self-defense, but it's a weird kind of self-defense because ordinarily in self-defense, you think of there's an evil person coming at you, somebody that's not innocent, right? And it's pretty non-controversial that you can kill that person if they pose a deadly threat to you or innocent people.
Right.
That's just standard self-defense. Even in crazy California, that's the law. That's the law
Right.
here. And it's been the law. It was in the common law going all the way back. Going all the way back. So there's nothing surprising about that. Um, but the the claim that the fetus, the unborn human fetus, is a threat to the mother, but innocent, nevertheless is innocent, but is still a threat and can be eliminated on the basis of self-defense. What would you say to that?
Well, keep in mind, McDonough does not even think the fetus is innocent. She thinks the fetus is basically parallel to a rapist who invades the mother's body and massively appropriates her liberty. And she doesn't think the fetus is innocent. She thinks it's an aggressor, an attacker. And then she makes another point. She says, just because a woman consents to sex does not mean she consents to that kind of massive invasion of her body. In other words, a woman consenting to sex is not her consenting to pregnancy. Well, I just find this argument bizarre. I mean, Lucas, imagine me saying, I consent to having sex, but I don't consent to getting an STD. Or I consent to a winning lotto ticket. I don't know if you've ever had surgery, but you don't consent to getting healed. You consent to the surgery, and it's on you to deal with the consequences of it. We consent to initial behaviors. We do not consent to outcomes that may be beyond our control. Look, sex is naturally ordered toward pregnancy. For her to try to bifurcate on that is really quite strange to me. But I think there's another problem with McDonough here. There can be no mugger unless two human parents get together and create him. We're talking here about McDonough arguing that her own child is a mugger, and it's a mugger she created. And she wants to make it look like she has no responsibility here. This is just an alien, massive
You're saying
invasion on her
mugger.
liberty. And
You're saying mugger, Mugger, not mother.
Correct.
Okay. I
Mugger.
think the
Yeah.
first time I heard it, I think I heard mother, and then I heard mugger later. Okay. Mugger is
Yeah.
in
No,
like a
it's mugger.
robber or
It
crime.
I
Yeah.
think I'm going to need to go to speech therapy after this interview, maybe.
Well, it's just the technology that we're dealing with. That's
There
all.
it is.
Yeah. So, okay. So it is odd. It is odd. You see this in some pro choice literature of uh, attributing criminal properties to the fetus. And it's all, I think rhetorically, the move is that it sure feels like that when you have an unwanted pregnancy. It feels the same way as if you're being assaulted criminally. And so, therefore, I think that's the move. The unborn human fetus, which is actually innocent, everybody knows that, has no criminal properties actually at all, like some criminal mind, mens rea, or you know, uh, even negligence, the criminal negligence you think of, that's not there in the fetus, right? But it feels that way to the woman who has an unwanted pregnancy. So therefore, we can treat it that way. I think that's what's happening
Well,
rhetorically.
yes, I think so. And here we are once again dealing with a standpoint epistemology that basically says how a mother perceives her child is what creates its ontological reality. My feelings about something determine what it is. A very postmodern turn idea, to put it mildly. And I think for a lot of people, once you reject the idea that moral truths are real and knowable the way that scientific and mathematical truths are real and knowable, once you have that division between science, which we call real knowledge, and morals, which we call values, meaning things that differing people will have differing ideas on. Once you buy into the scientism that says only science counts as real knowledge, then morals get relegated to the personal side, and it's very easy for people to then make the move and say, well, my child's value is based on my perception of him. And this is another thing. I'm sorry, I may be taking you off a direction you don't want to go, but
No, no,
this is
not at
another
all.
thing I think pro-lifers need to be aware of. There's been a massive shift in the ideal world that you're aware of, being you're a professor. If you look at the history of ideas, principally the question of epistemology, how do we know things? If you go back and just trace that history, to do a 2-minute version of that, if you look back to the Old Testament period, morals are real and knowable. They're grounded in the character of a holy God. Uh, Go forward, the classics, the Greek, Roman cultures, morals are still real and knowable. They're grounded in the faculties of the soul. For example, if you're doing the virtue ethics on an Aristotelian plane, um, move forward to the New Testament. Morals are still real and knowable. In fact, we're instructed as Christians that by the power of the Spirit, we can put to death the sinful deeds of the body and live as resurrected beings to the glory of God. Keep going forward. Now things get a little bit interesting. Uh, the pre-Middle Ages period, you got William of Ockham saying, look, the particulars really matter here, and we really need to get down to the particulars more than the universals. And then things really hit the fan. We get to the Enlightenment. And at that point, if you can't taste it, touch it, feel it, or see it, it's not real. Only things we can measure empirically are real. Well, what did that just do to morals? Morals are not things that you measure empirically. You don't taste them, you don't touch them, you don't hear them, you don't see them, you don't feel them. They are outside of that. And so morality just got relegated to the subjective realm. And you get guys like Hobbes who says, look, there's no human nature that's objective. We're just a heap of parts. You get Hobbes saying things like morals are just passions. Then you go even further and you get a guy like Kant who really wants to rescue morality from the empiricists. And he says, well, objective morals may exist. They probably do, but we can't get at them because we're trapped behind our own sense perceptions. All of this thinking that really goes back 500 years ago is having an impact right now on debates over abortion. And a lot of pro-lifers get impatient, Lucas. They say things like this. They say, well, we haven't been able to solve abortion since Roe v. Wade. The pro-life movement is a total failure because, look, abortion's been legal for almost 50 years now, and it proves that pro-lifers have been doing it all wrong. Whoa, wait just a stinking minute. They have no idea that we're dealing with a tsunami of 500 years of bad thinking on what it means to be human and what makes morals grounded. And people think that they can just announce failure, and they have no working knowledge of what's come before us here. I'll try to illustrate it this way. You've got a perfectly still lake, let's say Tenaya Lake in Yosemite National Park up in the Sierra Nevada mountains there. And you take a rock and throw it into that perfectly still alpine lake. What's going to happen to the waves? They're going to go out for miles if there's room for that.
Yes.
Well, that's what happened to us, really starting, even going back as far as Occam, where the focus shifted from the universals to the particulars and leading up to the Enlightenment, where only the particulars matter. That's what we're dealing with today. No wonder we're in a heap of trouble. No wonder worldviews matter in this debate.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a sermon there. I didn't mean to.
Well, you had to give a context for this, the key quote, which I thought was the tsunami of 500 years of bad thinking.
Yeah.
And that's what takes some training to see. It's not obvious to some people. Well, probably a lot of people. I'm not sure what they're learning on the campuses, but it's definitely not suited to being able to see it as clearly as you laid out there. So that leads me to the question of, since I'm an educator and you are as well, you've obviously thought pretty deeply about what kind of training is best suited. Now, I would say there's probably different kinds of training that we're talking about. You obviously provide effective training at one level, but you've just alluded to deeper training, training in metaphysics, epistemology, because you've talked about standpoint epistemology. You've referenced metaphysics. You've referenced ethics and meta ethics and stuff like that. And some people might not even know what those terms mean. It sounds like a Barnes and Noble section, metaphysics. What are you talking about? It's like the astrology or something. Even knowing that, and I'm linking it with something else you said about the folks that you debated. And you mentioned the Secular Humanist Association. It's interesting to just notice this. What is it about the humanists that would lead one to predict they're pro-choice? I mean, you could just say humanist and I not only know that they don't believe in God, I know that they didn't vote for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So now why am I able to know that though? That takes a lot of training, and a lot of people can't see. It's hard to sometimes explain. But what would you say? Why is it that the humanists are pro-choice?
Yeah, I think because the definition of humanist is changed. If you go back and look at the Middle Ages or even the Renaissance era, you're going to see people like Thomas More who were humanists. Erasmus of Rotterdam, humanist. Petrarch, the great poet, humanist. But that's not what we mean today. By humanists today, we mean somebody who basically has bought into philosophical naturalism. That's the underlying worldview. And philosophical naturalism, simply stated, is we live in a closed universe. The universe is nothing but physical reality, and there's nothing more to human beings than synapse firings and chemistry equations in the physical brain. You are your brain states, is what we're dealing with in terms of human nature and philosophical naturalism. So, humanist today does not mean you believe humans have intrinsic value, because intrinsic value does not exist on naturalism. On naturalism, what is just what is. There's nothing special to it. In fact, all living things are cosmic accidents, whether we're talking a cockroach or Bill Gates. We're all cosmic accidents. There's nothing intrinsic to our natures. In fact, there is no objective nature to human beings because we're strictly physical. So
What
on
about a
that
what about a
worldview,
vaccinated? What about a vaccinated cockroach
well, there you
with
go. If you're
a
vaccinated
mask?
and you wear your mask, you're okay.
I
Especially if it's
almost
a nine.
killed I almost killed a cockroach recently, but I saw he was vaccinated and he had a band-aid on his arm and he was wearing a mask. And
Okay,
so I
well,
was like, well, that cockroach is a good just example for the other cockroaches. And so I was like,
yeah.
I think we need more of that positivity, I think. But anyway,
Oh,
sorry, I
absolutely.
interrupted
Did
you.
you take a picture? Did you take a picture and send it to the CDC? I'm sure they would have gladly
we
posted
we
that.
we got a selfie and he wanted a copy, so I think it's on his cockroach Facebook page now, which I don't
How
have. I
cool
don't
is
see
that?
those pages. I don't follow them.
Yeah.
Well,
How
so
cool is that? So back
so
to humanists,
yes, back to
just
humanism.
real quickly. Back to humanists on a naturalistic worldview. Abortion would not be wrong because human beings don't have any kind of intrinsic nature that grounds their value. Now, contrast that with a theistic worldview. All humans have value because they bear the image of their maker. And because they bear the image of their maker, the shedding of innocent blood is strictly forbidden. Now, that is a very clear understanding of what makes humans valuable. On naturalism, though, which is now the foundation for current humanism, there's no basis for treating human beings as any more special than any other thing. So
Well,
humanism has become anti-humanism.
yeah, the language of bear the image of his maker. That's cool. Is that a phone that plugs into the wall? Like,
I was supposed to have disconnected that before I got on with you, and I didn't do it.
no,
So
it's
I'm
just
actually going to
cool that,
stand up
yeah,
and I'm going to disconnect this archaic, dinosauric phone that is
no
upstairs
problem.
here because
No
my.
problem. I would I was just gonna say, I think it's cool that you have a phone, like a wall phone.
I'm half tempted to put an old black payphone on my wall just to have people freak out and wonder what that thing is.
So why do you think that? Okay, so humanists clearly believe that we should have laws against murder. Um, but I don't. What say more about um the difference between a human and a cockroach? So how?
Well,
I don't know of any humans or humanists. That's such a old word too. That's like a 90s word kind of. My students don't even know what a humanist is. They probably never heard the
right,
term unless it was
right.
like a course like you mentioned, like a Western history course or something, if they still teach that. But the difference between a human and a cockroach, on a purely naturalistic, scientific, evolutionary perspective, however you want to put it, how do you establish that the human being is created in the image of God? You use the language of bears his maker, which I think is the exact way that Justice McLean described black people in his dissent in Dred Scott.
Absolutely. Yeah, McLean said, look, that slave, I loved his language there. He said he bears the impress of his maker. I love that word,
That's right.
impress.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know that quote too.
Oh, yeah, very well.
Justice McLean, just an interesting, for everybody listening, I'm sure you know this already, but Justice McLean, this is in 1856, the dissent in Dred Scott. Dred Scott was the case about slavery. Famously, Dred Scott was the name of the slave. And there's interesting parallels between slavery and abortion. You just got an idea to invite Justin Buckley Dyer on, have him talk about his book. Do you know about that book, Slavery, Abortion?
Say it again. I lost you. You faded on me. Which book?
It's Justin Buckley Dyer's book on slavery and abortion.
I actually have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right there on my shelf.
Okay. I was just talking to myself and saying I got to invite him on to talk about that book.
Yep.
But Justice McLean became a Republican when the Republican Party was formed. He was on the Supreme Court before the Republican Party was founded, and he wrote a dissent in a case called Prigg versus Pennsylvania in 1842. I don't know if you've read that case or you're familiar with that case, but it's brutal. It's a brutal case. Be ready for it. I mean, Dred Scott is brutal, but this is a slave catching case. It's in 1842. And Justice McLean was put on the Supreme Court by, I believe, Andrew Jackson, I want to say. I might be wrong about that. I know it was a Democrat. But he's an interesting story because he dissented in that case, in the slave catching case, for roughly this. You can see the same flavor. You would be able to predict that he would have dissented in Dred Scott if you were following that. And of course, the Republican Party was founded in 1854. Dred Scott happened two years later, roughly about a year and a half, 2 years later, and Justice McLean became a Republican. And in fact, both of the dissents in Dred Scott were Republicans. And so that's just interesting history for people that are paying attention to this stuff.
Yep.
And so the link, what would you say the link between slavery and abortion is? Is there any kind of commonality there?
There is, absolutely. And it's no surprise that leftists and Democrats in particular cry foul anytime we bring up the parallels. But look, they're undeniable. What was the central question in the slavery debate? Well, Lincoln made that very clear. It's this question: is the slave one of us? That was the issue. You had Douglas saying, look, I don't care if slavery is voted up or down. Let each state decide for itself. His whole popular sovereignty argument was basically the pro-choice argument of today on abortion. But Lincoln said that's not going to work because we first have to answer the question, who is this slave? If he's a man, then you cannot own a man the way a man owns his hog. The man will have certain natural rights based on what were articulated in the Declaration of Independence that flow through his nature that prohibit enslaving him. And Lincoln said, we've got to address the issue, who counts as one of us, before we talk about whether there's a choice to own slaves or not. The abortion debate is exactly the same question. Do the unborn count as one of us? And what typically happens is people simply assume the unborn don't count as one of us. They don't specifically argue for it. There's an unbelievable passage that points to the parallel we're talking about here. Chapter 32 of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Huck has been out on an adventure and he happens on the property of Aunt Sally. And Aunt Sally sees him coming up the walkway and she rushes out to meet him and she's all mixed up. She thinks it's Tom Sawyer. It's actually Huck. But she runs up to him and says, "Boy, where have you been? We've all been waiting for you. Where have you been?" And Huck just makes up a lie, a story. He says, "Well, ma'am, we were on a steamboat and that steamboat blew a cylinder head." And Aunt Sally says, "Well, was anybody hurt?" "No, ma'am. It killed a Negro, but nobody got hurt." "Well, that's good," she said, "because sometimes people do get hurt." Whoa. What was just assumed about the black man there? That he wasn't one of us. Now contrast that with Joe Biden a year ago on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. He's in office 2 days and he is celebrating Roe v. Wade. And here's a paraphrase of what he said. He said, "All Americans should celebrate reproductive freedom." Now, we all know what he means by reproductive freedom, abortion rights. "All Americans should celebrate reproductive freedom because it's good for everyone." Mr. President, time out. Does quote everyone unquote include the unborn? Is reproductive freedom good for them? Notice he simply assumed the unborn weren't human. He didn't argue for it. And this is a colossal fallacy that you and I are aware of. It's begging the question. Begging the question does not mean raising the question. A lot of people use it that way. It means you assume what you try to prove. People simply assume the unborn aren't human when that's the key issue in the abortion debate.
Right.
And that's like arguing in a circle. It would be like me saying the Los Angeles Lakers are the best team in basketball because no team is as good. I haven't really advanced an argument. I'm just using circular reasoning.
Yeah. It's very difficult to predict the future,
Yes.
especially when it's the future.
There it is.
I totally botched that Yogi Berra quote. I forget what it was. It was like, what do you know the Yogi Berra quote?
I know several, like always be sure you go to other people's funerals or they won't come to yours. When you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Those
Yeah.
are great. Um, you know, what would you say about, okay, so the secular humanists are called secular humanists, okay?
Yeah.
And isn't our country supposed to be secular? It's not supposed to be religious, right? It's not. So is secular is the opposite of religion, Scott. And so the secular people are right that we're supposed our laws are supposed to be secular. This is not my view. I'm just saying the view, right? So now if the secular humanists are pro-choice, which is just an empirical question. You can just go and see what their view is on abortion, and they are pro-choice. They support Democrats, the secular humanists. So why can't that be the right answer? Why is that? Why is it that that doesn't count against your position? And shouldn't we have a
Well, first of
secular
all,
government,
yeah. Well,
secular
first of all,
laws?
the argument, yeah. Well, first of all, that secular version of the argument commits the genetic fallacy. In other words, it faults an idea based on its origins rather than its merits. Suppose my argument is religious. You still haven't refuted my syllogism. You still haven't shown that one or more of the premises is false. You haven't shown that the argument is invalid, and you haven't shown that I've used my terms in a way that are unclear. So my argument would still stand. Calling my argument a name religious is a cop-out. It's not a refutation. It's also a category error. Like I said, arguments are sound or unsound, valid or invalid. Calling an argument religious is a category error, like me saying, how tall is the number 3? This is not going to serve as a refutation. But let's go to the more specific claim here that the US in particular has a strict separation of church and state, the secular and the religious. Well, I always want to ask the question, what do you mean by that separation? Do you mean it in a strict sense that the state should not establish an official religion? Or do you mean it in a robust sense that religious believers do not have a right to bring their values to the public square and argue for them the same way that everybody else does? I mean, why all the noise about the separation of church and state, but not the separation of feminist theory in the state or queer theory in the state? Why is it only church worldviews that get excluded, not these other metaphysical symptoms? Look, as you know, Lucas, everybody in this debate does metaphysics, even a strict naturalist. So let me prove that rather than just state it.
Hold on.
Everybody is doing metaphysics.
Before you do that, could you define what metaphysics is for everyone?
Yeah, metaphysics is that I'm going to go down to the New Age bookstore after I get done with you, smoke a joint, light some incense, and kind of just float off. No, I'm kidding.
Well, that's what I mean.
Metaphysics. Well, yeah. Well, you know, that's your perspective. That's your standpoint. I can't challenge it.
When I took Metaphysics 1 with J.P. Moreland at Biola University as a graduate student, that's not what JP meant by the term metaphysics.
That's not at all what he meant by it. And boy, JP is the guy to take metaphysics and epistemology from. Metaphysics has to do with questions of being or ultimate grounding of things. Questions like what is human nature? Questions like is God's essence physical or non-physical? These are questions of ultimate being, questions of how we might look at the ultimate grounding of things. So metaphysics on abortion has to do with the question of what makes humans valuable in the first place. And everybody is engaged on that metaphysical question. The pro-life view says that what makes humans valuable is that all humans by nature have a rational essence that bears the image of God, and their value comes from their humanity. They're valuable in virtue of the kind of thing they are, not some function they perform. The pro-choice metaphysics says that no, having a particular nature is not what grounds your value. Your functional ability does. And if you are not able to immediately exercise certain functional abilities, you don't have a right to life. Now let's stop right there. Both of those views are inherently religious. Both of them involve prior metaphysical commitments to what makes humans valuable and what our place is in the world. And there's no getting around that.
By religious,
so for the pro-choice side to try to disqualify the pro-life side for being metaphysically engaged, I'm sorry, both sides are involved in metaphysics because both are answering the same question: what makes humans valuable in the first place?
Okay. And that's what you mean by religious? Is
yeah,
metaphysical?
Now that kind of religion, the state has no way to be neutral on. Look, the state either recognizes that each and every human being has an equal right to life, or it doesn't. There's no middle ground there. I know in Roe v. Wade, Blackmun tried to appear neutral. He said we can't decide the question of when human life begins, but then he effectively decided it by deciding that abortion is legal through all 9 months of pregnancy, so life doesn't begin till birth.
It was rhetorically effective, but not logically effective.
Not logically, it was rhetorically effective. But look, Lucas, there's no way to avoid metaphysics. We all do it. The minute you ask the question, does this thing in front of me have rights? You're doing metaphysics. The minute you inquire about human nature, you're doing metaphysics. The minute you inquire about the nature of right and wrong, you're doing metaphysics.
So metaphysics is the foundation of ethics. Is that what you're saying? Did you catch that?
Yes.
Metaphysics is the foundation. Metaphysics is the foundation of ethics, then, would you say?
Yes, it's the first question we ask, the ultimate grounding of things.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. Christians in particular, I think, have a strong metaphysical foundation in that we can explain objective moral values. Objective moral values come from an objective moral lawgiver. You can't have objective moral rules without an objective moral lawgiver. So morals got to come from someplace. Human values got to come from someplace transcendent. And those concepts of objective morality and transcendent human value fit comfortably in a theistic worldview, but not so much in a naturalistic one.
Okay, now I know that we're getting into something controversial here, but I wanted to ask you about infanticide. And so I don't want to cause any controversy here in this discussion, because I know that we've been doing non-controversial things today. But
I thought you were going to ask me about vaccines when you said controversial.
okay, so we have law against murder. Going back to the secular claim, the issue of secularity. We have secular laws against murder. Supposedly, right? It's supposedly secular. But the murder laws start at birth. Okay. I think that's true in all 50 states as well as the federal government. I think on federal property. If you intentionally kill an infant, like if I just go up and somebody goes up to some lady at the grocery store on an army base, for example, the PX, and takes the 3-month-old baby and smashes the baby on, I don't want to say smashes it, because a baby is not an it. The baby is he or she. We only say it if we don't know the gender. And we only do that for babies. We don't do that for toddlers, or we certainly don't do it for older people. Like, what are you going to go visit your grandparents? I don't know. Is it a grandfather or grandmother? We don't do that. But for babies, for some reason, we say it. I don't know. It's kind of a bad pro-choice probably habit that we need to break. But let's say that it's a little girl. So not an it. It's a 3-month-old girl, and maybe her name is Melissa, let's just say. Of course, she doesn't have to have a name to be a little girl. We don't have to even know her name for it to be a little girl. And I just said it, didn't I? I said it. It's just very natural. Okay, so
I know what you mean.
That's murder, though. If someone was to take a little girl out of a grocery cart and the mother's like got her hands full with groceries and just smash that baby on the ground, and that would be murder, right? Prima facie, unless there's some other thing, but it would definitely be illegal.
Yeah.
Whether it's manslaughter or murder. Okay. So, aren't we assuming something magically happens at birth with that? And can that assumption be justified on secularity and stuff like that?
Well, I would add this one adjustment to what you just said. In a majority of states right now in the US, if you kill an unborn human being, you get charged with homicide. You get charged, for example, if you're driving your car, Lucas, and you collide with a vehicle
You're saying
driven by a
unborn.
pregnant mother.
Just to
What's
re-say
that?
you said unborn, right?
Yes.
Majority of states, unborn human being. Okay.
Unborn human beings. If you kill an unborn human being, you get charged with homicide. The only exception is abortion. So we have this weird cognitive dissonance going on. The public is appalled if you drive your car, hit another car driven by a pregnant woman, and kill her fetus. People think that's a tragedy. However, if she were on her way to the abortion clinic and instead of getting hit by you, she manages to make it safely to the clinic and have her child aborted there, why no harm, no foul. So the law is kind of sketchy here on what we're talking about. In fact, I would argue that it's intrinsically inconsistent on this question of, is it okay to kill a human fetus? There's another point, though, and that's this: we should not always assume that.
Hold on one sec. So when
Yeah.
you say it's intrinsically inconsistent, the law, where you have this fact pattern that doesn't match up with the
Yep,
the law. In other words, the fact pattern seems to be that's the law is based on is the value of the human being, right?
that's correct.
So we're arbitrarily drawing lines here, and we're saying that um, an unborn child's value is solely determined legally by the mother's mental states at that very moment.
That's pretty much it. If she wants the child, it has value and a right to life, and if she doesn't, it
So if
has
she
none.
wakes up and is depressed and smokes pot, right? Like some of my students, then that's child abuse if she's pregnant. That's child abuse if she wants to keep the child as she's smoking pot.
Yeah,
But if she woke up and said, I'm going to get rid of this pregnancy, I'm going to make an appointment at Planned Parenthood, but first I'm going to smoke a bowl of pot. Then that's not child abuse. And you're saying that
yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. The law against child abuse has to be grounded in a consistent fact pattern. In other words, a lot of people are
yeah.
not used to thinking this way, but the value of the child has to be a fact that's taken cognizance of in the law. Is that right? Is that fair to
That's
say?
correct. And the way we're applying the law um, is really inconsistent. So Scott Peterson in California uh, goes to jail for double murder. I mean, even in California, they
And
charged
that
him with
actually happened.
double
Yeah.
murder. Yeah, it happened. He killed his wife, and she was pregnant with a child, and I think her name was Lacey, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds right. Lacey
And he
Peterson.
got
Yeah.
charged with double murder, not even homicide, murder. And he's on death row there in California. Yet it would have been perfectly okay for Lacey to kill their child, but not Scott.
It's odd. It's that kind of relativism about human value just for that age period is weird.
Yeah,
And it's just kind of arbitrary to say at that age that's okay for that age, but then later ages it's not okay.
right. Well, what is it about the child's location, his size, his level of development, or his degree of dependency that justifies intentionally killing him? That is the question that people don't want to answer. They love to assert differences between born and unborn, but they don't want to tell us why those differences matter in the first place. And as you know, getting back to the slavery parallel, this is the identical question Lincoln dealt with when he would debate proponents of slavery. They would say that slave differs from us. And Lincoln would say, so? Yeah, he differs from us. Why does that matter? You got to do better. Why do those differences justify enslaving him? And to quote Lincoln almost word for word, here's what he would say. Quote, you say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then, the fair skinned man having the right to enslave the dark skinned man. Take care, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it's not skin color, it's a matter of intellect. The white man, you allege, has superior intellect to the dark man. Take care yet again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet who has intelligence greater than your own. And you can see what Lincoln is doing here. By the force of principled reasoning, he was showing there was nothing in a matter of principle that justified enslaving the dark man that wouldn't also justify enslaving whites. And we're making the same argument. And by the way, our more honest critics do this too. Peter Singer, who has conclusions that are abominable to us, at least he's consistent, because here's what Singer says: fetus is not self-aware, Newborn is not self-aware. You can kill both. Now, Planned Parenthood is appalled that we can kill newborns, but Singer calls them out on it. There's no essential difference between the fetus and newborn that would protect one and not the other. At least his consistency is on display there.
Absolutely. And I think Planned Parenthood has a very creative and catchy name. It's interesting they didn't call it Planned Motherhood. I don't know why they chose the term Planned Parenthood, since the
They were gender
father,
sensitive even back.
well, the father has nothing to do with it for them. Well, anyway, but Planned Parenthood, it seems like just that idea, just on the slogan,
Yeah.
would imply that if you have a newborn that you did not plan for, it's interesting. It's just interesting. I'm not going to suggest, because maybe they would say um, adopt or something. What do you say to pro-choicers when they say that we can look at pro-lifers who don't adopt and see what they really believe, and that they're hypocrites?
Well, here's my answer to that. How does my alleged unwillingness to adopt a child justify you intentionally killing him? I mean, Lucas, imagine if I said to you, unless you agree to adopt my 3 sons by noon tomorrow, I shall execute them. Now, that's not going to happen. They're bigger than me now. But suppose I said that to you. If you decline, if you refuse my ultimatum, am I justified intentionally killing my sons? Of course not. In other words, let's go back to our syllogism. How does my alleged unwillingness to adopt a child prove that my syllogism is invalid, unsound, or unclear? The answer is it does none of that. All it does is launch an ad hominem attack on me. It doesn't refute my argument. And this is why I said right up front, the 3 most important words are syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. It's not going to work to refute the pro-life argument by pointing out that I'm somehow inconsistent. Maybe I am, but my argument could still be valid, could still be sound. And I think a lot of pro-lifers forget to keep the main thing the main thing. Their
Yeah.
first answer when someone says, well, what about all the kids? Are you adopting all the ones you don't want aborted? They say, yeah, we're willing to adopt. Stop right there. You just bought the premise that your behavior determines the validity of your argument. And nothing could be further from the truth. Challenge the premise. Even if I am that stingy, even if I am that bad, how does that refute my essential syllogism? How does it justify you intentionally killing an innocent human being?
Yeah, it's just as beautifully said. It's just as irrelevant to refuting you as me saying I don't like your shirt, therefore you're wrong.
Yeah, it's an ad hominem attack that, even if it's true, does nothing to refute the argument that's been advanced. And sometimes the ad
Yes.
hominem attacks are more subtle. There'll be things like, oh, well, you think abortion is unjust killing? Okay, fair enough. Are you willing to shoot abortion doctors? Then you would shoot a neighbor who was killing his toddler in the front yard. If you saw a neighbor shooting or getting ready to execute his toddler in the front yard of his home, and the only way you could stop him was lethal force, you would use it. But you won't use lethal force against abortionists. There goes your whole argument. All right, well, let's look at this for a moment. Suppose I'm just a coward. I'm afraid to shoot an abortionist, either because I fear him or fear being prosecuted. Could my argument, my syllogism for the pro-life view still be valid and sound, even if I unwillingly apply it? And of course, the answer is yes. My argument stands or falls on its merit, not my behavior. But by the way, I don't think I am inconsistent on this. What follows from believing that abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being is that you will work to take out the machinery of death, not that you will shoot individual abortion advocates. To give you one example of this,
Right.
in World War II, the Allies dropped incognito behind German lines prior to D-Day Allied soldiers that were dressed German, they looked German, smelled German, had German cigarettes, spoke flawless German. They were spies. Every one of them believed Hitler was evil. But when they landed behind enemy lines prior to the invasion, did they immediately start shooting up individual Nazi soldiers? No, they were after bigger game. They were there to spy out the land and prepare for taking out the machinery of death. And pro-lifers are doing the same thing. What follows from our opposition to abortion is that we will work to gain legal protection for unborn humans, not that we'll shoot up individual abortion doctors.
That was a beautiful setup to the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is strategy and issues. One of the things that you've alluded to earlier today, Roe versus Wade, which was the key thing that happened in the abortion debate,
Yep.
1973.
Yep.
You mentioned that some people criticize the do you call it anti-abortion or do you call it pro-life? Which do you call it?
I call it pro-life.
Okay. The pro-life movement. Do you have a problem with calling it anti-abortion? Is that
pro-life has always been the term that has been used to describe those who oppose abortion. And lately, there's been an attempt by our critics to take that label away from us and say, you're not really pro-life, because if you were pro-life, you'd be opposing the treatment of refugees, you'd be supporting tax increases to alleviate poverty, you'd be against war, you'd be against capital punishment, you would be for equitable pay, you'd be anti-gun. And I mean, they give us a whole laundry list of things we have to do to be, quote, pro-life.
Well, I don't mind. I don't mind
buy that. I'm not going to let our critics. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't mind the label anti-slavery.
No, and I don't mind anti-abortion, but why do I rhetorically need to give up a label? No one goes to pro-choicers and said, well, you know what? You don't have a right to that label. You're not pro-choice on school choice. You're not pro-choice on taxation. You're not pro-choice on school unions. You're not pro-choice on COVID-19 measures. Therefore, you are not pro-choice. You are pro-abortion. I mean, nobody demands that of them, but they do of pro-lifers.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine going to the American Cancer Society and saying, you have no right to call yourself a healthcare group because you're only fighting one disease and not many. What are you doing about lupus? What are you doing about diabetes? What are you doing about strokes and heart disease? You're not a health organization. You just want to be that, but sorry, you lose. I mean, nobody would say that to them, but they say that exact same thing to pro-lifers.
The argument that you just used is a type of, would you say it's a reductio ad absurdum type of argument?
Yeah.
So what's a strategy with reductio ad absurdum? Why is that a good form of argument?
Well, it's basically showing that your opponent is going to pay too high a price to hold that position, that his argument is going to prove more than he wants it to. And it takes the wind out of his sails immediately. And that's why, I think at times you need to be selective. Not everything can be reduced that way, but at times it's fair play.
Well, Scott, you're giving us, you're hitting so many interesting, and I know we're kind of barely scratching the surface, but I think what people are going to be hearing from this is the very obvious thing that you are very well prepared and you've thought deeply about this and you're ready. You're ready on a moment's notice because we did not plan this episode at all. I just said, hey, you want to come on? And we are just flying from the hip. So it's important for people to understand that's really how this episode came about. In fact, actually, that's how all my episodes come about. Is I don't plan them. I just like bring them on and we're already ready. We're already prepared because we put in the hard work, years and years of this. And we're all about helping people move the ball down the road in their own life, how they can get prepared. But I just wanted to say, ask you something really quickly about the Supreme Court before we go into your work and how we can link how to support you and learn more about what you're doing online and stuff. When you mentioned early on that you mentioned early on that there's a criticism of the pro-life view that it's been 50 years since Roe versus Wade, and what have we done? I would just say, as a PhD in public law and American politics, that that's a function, believe it or not, to a large extent on the power of the Supreme Court in our system, the way it's designed. That's a that's a political
Yeah,
sciency thing to say, but it's
yeah,
just an observation that the court
mm,
is very powerful even when it lacks authority. What I mean by lacks authority is, I don't mean that people won't follow the wrong decision and agree to it. I mean, it lacks the deeper authority that it really needs for it to be true law. And I would just
yeah,
say that a good Supreme Court decision has to be justified. And the court recognizes this too, which is why they issue justifications for their decisions. No other uh, no other function of government is quite like it. The legislative branch will give kind of rough reasons, whereas this and whereas that, and a lot of that's BS. The president might say, "Hey, I'm going to pardon this guy," but he doesn't have to give a reason. He just has the blanket power to pardon. Now, the court could just give a per curiam decision without giving any reasons. But they recognize, and it's always been recognized since the very earliest Supreme Court decisions and federal court decisions, that they really do need to justify their result. And as soon as they say that, and as soon as they acknowledge that, then they're admitting that their justifications could miss the mark, and they can be subject to scrutiny, and they could be wrong actually, and then later they
mhm,
could be overturned. And that's the wonderful thing about our system. But because the Supreme Court is so powerful, and because the court system takes so long, and it's so tricky, uh, that's where I'm going with this. Is it's so important to get the right judges in there that don't make those mistakes, and it's really hard to know who those people are ahead of time. And I know you've thought about
yeah,
this, and that goes to the strategy you mentioned earlier. Like you mentioned, going behind enemy lines, and you're not shooting the first Nazi that you see, because that's not strategic. So
right.
really, I mean, it's about some part of this is about figuring out who the right judges are. How do we do that?
Well, this may be controversial for some of your leaders, or some of your readers and listeners, but I'm just going to say it. Uh, if the court overturns Roe v. Wade, and it will also have to overturn Planned Parenthood versus Casey, because what the Dobbs case presents the court with, the Mississippi case known as Dobbs, the state of Mississippi passed a ban on abortion after 15 weeks. But Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey say you cannot restrict abortion until after viability, which they put at 24 weeks. So, in order for the court to uphold the Mississippi law, it's going to have to gut Roe and Casey to do it. Otherwise, what's the court going to do? Invent a new viability standard and say, well, we're just going to arbitrarily move the line to 15 weeks instead of 24? Well, that's not going to help the credibility of the court. So I'm of the opinion they're going to overturn the court, or overturn Casey and overturn Roe. And I'll go out on a limb and say I think it will be 6-3. And my reason for that is that even though Judge Roberts has been trending left lately, his main concern is that the credibility of the court be preserved. That seems to be his overriding focus as Chief Justice. Once he sees the majority is going to go that way, he'll vote with the majority to preserve the credibility of the court. That's what I think he will do. Plus, he may not want Clarence Thomas writing the majority opinion. He'd rather do it himself. I don't know. But that's going to be my guess. But here's the thing, Lucas. Um, when the court does that, you better be willing to thank former President Donald Trump. I know there's a lot of people that think you can't be Christian and support Trump. And look, the man had his moral flaws. Let's not pretend they weren't there. But at the end of the whole process here, if you're happy with what the court does, you have one man to thank, Donald Trump. And I better not see a bunch of David French style essays that say, oh, you're violating your Christian faith to be happy today because the court did this. No, this man did something very important. How do we get good judges? We do our best to pick presidents to appoint them. And sometimes we get that wrong. Look, Ronald Reagan got it wrong with Sandra Day O'Connor. George Herbert Walker Bush got it wrong with Souter. There are all kinds of examples of us making a wrong call. I'm hopeful we got it right this time. I'm hopeful. And I'm actually quite optimistic we're going to get it right. But we have to be politically involved. This notion that says we can be pro-life, but we don't have to deal with the political ramifications. That's a huge bifurcation on what it means to be pro-life. If I were on a slave ship as an African man in 1860 outside Charleston Harbor, and I was a Christian slave, I would be praying very hard that my brothers and sisters on the mainland would get political and do something about my condition. Politics
and
is
what
part of how
political
we apply our Christian worldview.
in the situation you just mentioned in 1860, specifically, what would be the political decision you'd hope that Christians would make at that time?
Well, at that point, I'm going to assume a pre-Civil War because we're still a year out from the opening shots of
Well, it was an
Manassas
election
in
year.
Fort Sumter. What's that?
1860 was an election year.
It was, yeah, it was, and that's when Lincoln got elected. So I would have voted for Lincoln. I would have prayed that they would vote for Lincoln, that they would vote for his party, and would oppose the pro-slavery forces. And their Christian worldview applies.
No problem, right? It's not an issue, right? It's not that politics per se is a problem. It's that actually the opposite. it's
Yeah.
it's trying to put your head in the sand and pretend that God has placed us here not to take responsibility for what happens to people. That's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say
Yeah.
that's correct?
It's a huge problem. That hey, I can oppose abortion personally, but I'm not going to lift a finger to stop it politically. How does that square with a well-orbed Christian worldview? The answer is it doesn't.
Yeah. I would add one thing to what you said. I agree with what you said about Trump. I would also add that we have to thank the Republican Senate.
Yes, we do.
Mitch McConnell.
He did a good job.
That's controversial to say, but it's absolutely just as important as the president, because
Without Mitch McConnell, you don't get those judges.
They stood by Brett Kavanaugh when he was being skewered like a roasted pig on a beach in Hawaii. I mean, they stood by him. And I would also say Chuck Grassley, who was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and all of the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I would even include Jeff Flake in that when he was there, because even though he was flaky. But
well, and you look at Susan Collins.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And this raises a point, not to close out our time on strictly partisan politics, but I'm going to get somewhat partisan here for a moment.
Why do you think I called it the Republican professor?
There you
have
go.
Total freedom. The reason is because the reason I called it that, I got so much pushback on that. People were like, no, it's a conservative professor. No, it's the constitutional. No, it's a classical liberal. No, I was like, no. Okay, no. I want people to feel free to make wisecracks about Democrats, or you can make wisecracks about
Absolutely.
Republicans. I don't censor. I'm pro First Amendment.
Right.
I'm pro Second Amendment as
Right.
well. So watch it.
Yeah.
But I think that it's we need to make these connections, even if it's just by osmosis. I mean, we need to make these free associations. It helps, I think. So go ahead.
It really does. And here's what I would give your listeners to think about. What does it mean to vote pro-life? Now, a few years ago, I refused to sign a pledge that was passed around that said, I will never vote for a candidate who supports abortion. I did not sign that pledge because I did not believe it was pro-life. And let me explain what I mean. What does a pro-life vote look like at the legislative level? If I were given a choice in my district between a pro-life Democrat and a pro-abortion Republican, guess who I would vote for? I'm
You
going
would
to
vote
vote
for
for
the
the
Democrat.
nope. I'm going to vote for the pro-abortion Republican.
Okay.
And here's why. At the legislative level, politics is party driven, not individual driven. If Democrats control the chamber, pro-life legislation is dead on arrival. Not only that, bad bills will get advanced. If Republicans control the chamber, 90% of them are going to vote pro-life. They're going to vote with me. The few that won't aren't going to be an issue. And therefore, I'm going to vote for the party that's most likely to advance protection for human life. A pro-life Democrat will never get a chance to vote on a pro-life bill unless his party is in the minority. Because if it's in the majority, he'll never have a chance to do it. So the pro-life Democrat is no good to me whatsoever in saving lives. I will vote for the party most likely to limit the evil and promote the good. Now, I'm not saying Republicans are perfect in all way. They're darn close in a lot of ways. But look, there's clearly a difference between the parties. And to pretend otherwise is just intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. When people talk about the uni party, they're looking on one plane and they're not seeing some of the deeper issues that are really there that are different.
Mhm.
And some of this is up to us because we do have we should take on responsibility for shaping the party as well. And that's another
Right.
reason to be active, because there are constant pressures to
That's right.
corrupt these institutions. There just are. And a lot of them have been corrupted. Doesn't mean they're totally lost. It just means that
Right.
we now have a lot of more work to do on that, on these issues. And so
We do.
um, now I would make I would make one criticism of Trump, and it's from a tragic sense, so like what Victor Davis Hanson would say, a tragic view of the world. I don't have one of those optimistic, naive views. I mean, I'm optimistic that in Revelation 20, somebody is sitting on a throne and is going to judge wisely and justly. And I'm optimistic that the Holy Spirit is with us in our work here, and that we are on the right side. I do believe that, but I'm
Right.
not naive about it. And but I would say about Trump, I would say that he was running on. It's a tragic irony. It's kind of an irony, and he's going to face it in the future. And you got to think about this: that Trump's worst enemy is Trump, and politically, I mean, because
Without a question. Yeah.
he could have been so much more effective politically. And I think
Yes.
part of it is his temperament, and part of it is stuff that's not going to change his personality and things like that. But ironically, Twitter probably helped him by taking him off. Ironically,
Right.
but I would say this: I would say that um, it's ironic that when people run for office as a non-politician, that first of all, that is ironic. Just that right there. I'm not a politician, but I'm running for office. Please vote for me. That kind of contradiction is fraught with problems. If he
Yeah.
would have become a politician, he would have been more effective, which is exactly what he hated.
Yeah.
Because politicians are careful about what they say, and and
They
they
are.
they don't want to offend the wrong people, and so I just wanted to make that point. That's all. Tell
No,
us
it's a
about.
fair point. I
Yeah.
agree. And believe me, I've got criticisms of Trump. In fact, I'm hoping he doesn't run this next time around. I really would prefer at this point DeSantis. But
Yeah, we'll
I do
see.
appreciate what he did for the federal courts. And by the way, my comments politically are not, I have to say this because of the stupid law, but
Feel
my
free.
comments about politics are my own. I'm not representing Life Training Institute here. I'm
Okay.
speaking as Scott, the individual, to the Republican professor.
Yeah, well, we don't have that problem here at the Republican
I,
Professor.
I love it that you don't. And by the way, before I have to scurry off here, um,
Tell us how we
can I give
support you.
a
And
brief plug for how people can
yes,
get a hold of us?
what kind of work are you doing, and how can people find out more information? How can they support you?
Well, people who would like to learn more, I would invite you to consider taking some advanced training. And let me give you three options for that. The first would be to take a graduate course for credit at Cedarville University this summer that I'll be teaching. That course is a summer intensive, and you do a bunch of reading before you show up for the 1 week of lectures in June. And then you have time to finish your reading and write your final paper after the lectures. That's going to happen starting in June. And you can go to Cedarville's website to get information about that, cedarville.edu. Uh, Another option you have is to take that same course at the undergraduate level that I'll be teaching. Both these courses are for credit. You earn academic credit. That's going to be at South Florida Bible College and Seminary in Fort Lauderdale in July. That course will also start in May, later in the month. And you can register for that course if you prefer Florida over Ohio. Then there's a third
And
option.
these are
Some of you are
online?
thinking,
These are
no,
online?
it's in person. In
In
person.
person. Okay, that was an
Yep.
important distinction. Okay.
Yep.
In
Now there is
person.
an online option here, and that's option three. You might be thinking, I don't need credit. I just want to get the training. Okay, here's the option for you. Frank Turek's cross examination ministry has online Christian courses, and I have a course there called The Ethics of Abortion. We take a deep dive into the best thinkers on the other side: Jeff McMahon, Peter Singer, Michael Tooley, David Boonin. We examine the strongest arguments against the pro-life view and show why they are not persuasive. We equip you to be a pro-life apologist, but I will warn you, you will work your butt off. You have no idea the amount of work you're going to have to put in. I
Is
am
it
one tough
self-paced?
professor. What's that?
Is it self-paced?
It is. It can be self-paced if you want to do the self-paced version. The Frank Turek course has two options: self-paced, where you can go at your own rate and you're not granted a certificate for finishing it, or you can do the premium version where you get Zoom calls with me and you have a 10-week window to finish things up. And we had the first time around 55 students do that, and they loved it. And so it went so well last fall. We're rerunning it again starting April 18th. Just go to crossexamine.org and look at the online courses that are available. Anybody that wants to contact us, our website is prolifetraining.com. Prolifetraining.com. If you want to support our work reaching out to students, you can do it there. We go into Catholic and Protestant high schools and do pro-life apologetics presentations. We don't do abstinence talks. We support those groups, but that's not what we do. We do, why is the pro-life case true and reasonable to believe? That's what we focus on, the worldview stuff. And we reach an awful lot of students doing just that. We have a team of speakers that spreads out all over the country and does those kinds of talks.
Scott, what's the course called at Cedarville University? What's the course called?
That is going to be called Abortion, Rhetoric, and Philosophy.
And what's the course
And
called
what I'll do, Lucas,
at
I'll send you
Florida?
a link to it.
Okay. And what's the course
So you can
called?
put that up on your site. And I'll do one other thing. I'm going to
What's the
send
Florida
lecture
course called?
notes.
What's the
What's
Florida?
that?
What's the Florida course called?
It is called The Ethics of Abortion.
Okay. Same as the Frank Turek.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You said something about sending me something?
I'm going to send you not only links to those courses, but I'm going to send you lecture notes where anybody that goes to your website, if you want to pin them there, they can get a summary of the pro-life argument, the support for it, and just that syllogism, and a way to kind of review what we talked about here.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Scott.
Thank you,
We'll catch.
Lucas. We have to meet in person. And next time I'm out in California, are you in Northern California now or Southern?
I'm in Southern California. Southern California.
Southern. You got to say that right. Southern.
I got Southern California. I got a truck outside. I got a gun rack.
Yeah. You got to put that egg in your throat to say it right, you know?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
working on it. I'm working on it.
It's not Statesboro, it's Statesboro. You know, you got to get that right. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to be out in California in April, and you know, if time permits, we may just need to see if we can't meet.
That's right around the corner. Yeah.
It's coming up. Are you near the valley?
Well, like I can be, like,
Like
depending.
you can be.
I'm in Orange County.
Like, yeah. Okay, so you're close. We might be able to find a place to engage in some Spurgeon fellowship.
Okay. Sounds great. Yeah.
If not that trip, the next one, but it would be fun. Hey, thanks for having me on, and
Yep. Thanks for coming on.
hope we can have a conversation like this again. It was fun.
We'll do episode 2 maybe later in the year, if that sounds good.
Sounds great, sir.
Okay. See ya.